All right, we are now live. Welcome to Leaders in Conversation, where we explore more human ways to work with leaders who are challenging the conventional wisdom. Although we're no longer in the industrial age, how we think about the nature of work is often still stuck in that paradigm. Being human at work is complex and challenging, but we believe it's worth the effort because it is the path to more productive, engaged, and motivated people. I am your co-host, Ken Blackwell, and this is my co-host, Amanda Cookson.
Hello.
Today, we are mixing things up a bit. We are going to change format a little. Instead of welcoming a guest, we are going to have a conversation between the two of us. We're going to continue to explore this theme that we have been exploring of being human at work, but this time from our own perspectives and experiences. And all before we do that, though, we thought perhaps we ought to give a little moment to ourselves. We normally do an intro to our guests, but we thought, well, we ought to take a moment just to introduce ourselves in case you don't know who we are, if this is your first time joining us. So I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to do your intro first, and then I'll take over and do mine.
Okay, so I'm Amanda Cookson. I'm co-founder of Northern Valley Creators, which is a business that works with digitally driven businesses to make them more human. I'm also very much into what it means to be human at work and work with lots of different thought leaders on that to kind of understand what we need to do differently to kind of build that humanness.
Great. And I am Ken Blackwell. I am CEO of empathise, a firm based here in Princeton in the US. And I rescue accidental leaders and dysfunctional teams and by helping them work more collaboratively together to connect better, to be able to do the work that they need to together. And I also have this interest in, being human at work and what that means and how we can bring out the best in ourselves. So we're going to have this conversation today and focus on a point of intersection between Amanda and I. For those of you who maybe have caught this in the past, the reason that Amanda and I even know each other is because we were both part of a cohort studying conversational intelligence. And that's a cohort, a mastermind that we have continued on with now for, I think, about 4 years. And so we've known each other that time. And so this intersection of neuroscience and how it impacts humans and how humans connect at work. And our thesis is that understanding the neuroscience of the human brain is an essential skill of leadership in this new human workplace. And so to start off with that, I guess we'll start bouncing back and forth here. Why do we think that is, right? So Amanda, why is it that we think this is an essential skill, not just something interesting, not just something you could learn on the side? Why is it essential for human leadership?
I think it's all to do with the brain. And what I want to do is, as we've got kind of people with us, I'm just going to put a little something in for the people listening as well, because I'd be really interested in what our kind of viewers, listeners think is an essential skill for leaders. But anybody who has worked with me or been coached by me gets the hand. So this is my handy model of the brain. And essentially, why is understanding the brain essential for leaders? Because when we are in a calm state, when our brain is relaxed and we can access our whole brain. So this is our prefrontal cortex, which is kind of represented here, which is our problem solving, creative thinking, innovation. Here is our amygdala, which is our kind of warning system for when we're stressed. And kind of what I say to people is that when we are stressed, when we are anxious, we flip our lid. So our brain floods with cortisol, our amygdala detects there's an issue. And if we can't access this part of our brain, we drop 10 IQ points. We are no longer wanting to cooperate, to create with others. And we become effectively more stupid, more emotional, more reactionary. And if you are a leader that does not grasp this, then you are inadvertently flipping the lids of everyone around you and making your people collectively stupid. So we don't want that. The other thing is that I work with a lot of people who are, Ken, you've got me started. You may not get a word in edgeways for a whole hour.
I'll break in.
Yeah. So I work with a lot of agile coaches who are really interested in the whole thing around psychological safety and how you can build teams quickly. And again, the whole thing about psychological safety, which is the work by Amy Edmondson, and it was all Google, when they did their research into what made a great team, kind of came across this concept of psychological safety. And essentially they researched lots of things that they thought would make a team great. And what they found in the end, it was actually about how psychologically safe we feel with each other. So again, if you don't feel safe, if your lids are flipped, or if you're being kind of triggered by other people, you don't want to cooperate, you don't want to share. And it doesn't matter how brilliant, how clever, how fantastic, how experienced your people are. If you as a leader make people flipped and they don't share their knowledge, they don't share what they see, you may as well have hired stupid people. So I think it's the number one skill that we need. So I don't know whether.
So let's unpack that a little bit, right, for folks. So if we even go back to, flipping the lid and the amygdala and what that is, right? So the amygdala is a structure of the brain. We usually associate it with fight or flight. If we think about our more primitive brain, if we think about, more primitive animals, primitive mammals, right? This is a part of the brain that has been around for eons, and it has what it keeps us safe, right? It is the thing which allows us to see danger, and it triggers several interesting things in the brain to keep us safe. One of the things it does is it does a very quick energy audit, or it already knows this, and says, in order to run away from that dangerous animal that's coming down the path, we don't need our higher thinking. So it quickly turns that off and sends that energy to our legs, to our heart, to our lungs, allows us to run away very quickly, climb a tree, get safe. The problem is in our modern society, it's not that we're facing that physical danger as much anymore, but we still face danger, right? The lack of psychological safety. And that ancient part of our brain doesn't know the difference. And so when that starts to trigger, and it's not an on-off, that this can be a variable response mechanism as well. We can be a little bit triggered or a lot triggered. When that happens, yeah, we actually start to lose the ability to think because that part of our brain isn't being powered anymore. Kind of like shutting off part of your computer, right? It now is not there available for us. We can't use it. People might have used the phrase in the past, I was so mad I couldn't think straight. Well, yeah, in that triggered moment, right? You are triggered and you're not using that part of your brain and you can't see your way to a solution. You're just having that emotional reaction. If you've been around a small child recently, right, and seen them have a meltdown, this is the same sort of thing. Now, in the workplace, a leader might be saying, hey, I'm not triggering meltdowns. People aren't, rolling on the floor and having tantrums, but we can be triggering them in perhaps ways that we're not outwardly seeing, but are still having some of those inward impacts, right? So, in terms of why this is so critical, there's some biology here, right? And so, Amanda, what you're talking about in terms of, causing people to flip their lid, yeah, what are those things, right? So maybe we can dive into a bit of what some of those triggering aspects are, right? So as leaders, we can avoid those pieces.
I mean, what I loved about our CIQ training we did was this idea that conversations have this chemical reaction. So actually something that can be very triggering is see me. Yeah. I'd like to have a meeting with you, Ken. Come to my office. Shit, why? What have I done? What's the problem? And we have a negativity bias in our brain. So even if you're thinking, even I'm thinking, I've invited you to my imaginary office now. And I'm thinking, Ken, you've done an amazing job. I'm going to tell you how awesome you are. Your negativity bias will think, why does Amanda want to speak to me? What have I done wrong? And I'm sure, people listening will be like, oh my God, yeah, I've totally had that, where people have said they want to have a word. I did a piece of work the other day about imposter syndrome, because, this is like a big thing that I struggle with. And it's also a kind of a passion area. And so I was talking to the group about how important it is to help people who struggle with imposter feelings, to give them really constructive, positive feedback. So the lady that I was running the session with said to me at the end, in front of everyone, thank you so much, Amanda. And I've got some specific feedback I'll give you later. And it's still sitting with me like, oh my God, what's she going to say? What did I do wrong? Because that's just how your brain works. So just the point of being given feedback is very triggering.
Well, and so the language, right? So, we don't have as many of these physical threats anymore, but the threats still come and our brains can't distinguish between physical, mental, emotional threat. And the words, can I have a word? you know, might have that association for some folks. I was working with an HR leader who, you know, is in a manufacturing area, would want to be out and about, but couldn't leave his office because anytime HR was seen on the factory floor, it meant someone was getting fired. So, you know, just the sight of someone from HR is triggering for some folks, right? So we have to be aware, what are some of the language pieces, what are some of the words that can cause this chemical cascade, which then leads to amygdala hijack, which leads to, you know, bad things happening.
Judgment, I think, is the other one. So anything where you are feeling judged can be very triggering. And I think something that people don't often think about, but if you are mean about a coworker, so gossiping, then it creates a lack of safety. Because if you can say that about one person, then what are you going to say about me? And so then you get that thing, if you've ever had the unfortunate luck to be with a group that are just mean about each other, never wanting to leave, because you know as soon as you get up, it's going to be your turn for character assassination. So you have to be really, really careful, I think, about how you talk about other people. Dale Carnegie always says never criticize, condone, or complain, I think, so that you're staying in this kind of positive state of looking for the positives and just not kind of triggering people in that way. An interesting other one is around expertise. So I work with a lot of technical specialists who have a lot of expertise. But if you go into a conversation where, you know, I'm a smart ass, I know everything, that immediately will make people feel incredibly uncomfortable. So trying to stay in that space of discovery. And I was just thinking about, I'm working with a leader at the moment, and they have got a growing team, and they are trying to get everybody to feel comfortable and to do their best work, and they've got quite big targets and sort of stressed. And so I've sort of said, well, you know, a great thing to do as a leader is to ask your people, how do you like to be managed? You know, what am I doing that you like? What am I doing that you don't like? You know, give me some feedback, and then I can adapt for you and your style. So you know, what am I doing that's okay? And it's the feedback is everything's fine, thank you. Because I think you also have to make it really safe for people to give you feedback, and to almost make the unspeakable easy to be said, so that you can hear it and take action on it. Because people often think everything is absolutely fine, but they're not making it easy and comfortable enough for people to really communicate effectively with them.
And that issue of expertise is an interesting one. I've got a client in mind who, you know, for various motivations, when they have entered a new role, and this has happened twice now, they are struggling to place themselves. They're struggling to land and you know, build their reputation, identity, and the way in which they're doing it, which is to overdo their expertise, to kind of come in and be a bit too controlling, a bit too overwhelming, and it's backfiring on them. And causing people to recoil and push back. And, you know, that starts a vicious cycle, of course, of them trying harder and harder to show how much they know. And rather than starting off with a, hey, well, what do you know? You know, how can I be of assistance? You know, they come in like, oh, I've got to have an entire plan. I've got to just do all of this myself. And that openness, that vulnerability to question has been something that's come very, very difficult for them. And they're slowly starting to do that. And in this brand new role, I think they've made a switch from what's held them back in the past. But that's a big mind shift, and creating that safe space for people to, yes, actually honestly answer you. Because I think so many times when a boss rolls in and says, hey, you know, what am I doing? Am I doing anything that you have trouble with? They're like, no, sir, you know, no, ma'am. You know, you don't want to really give them that feedback, or you can't even think of it in the moment because you're feeling a bit unsafe.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that because, you know, I've been doing some research into human leadership, and, you know, what does this kind of future space need from our leaders? And I think what's been really interesting there is people have talked about, when you think of a leader, and this is probably showing my age, But I think, first of all, the first image that comes into mind is a man, is an older man, and is a very alpha, very dogmatic, very kind of authoritative. This is what we're doing. Yeah, I'm taking no shit from you. We're all going this way. And I think that that is of the past. It's not really needed or helpful anymore. And I think there's a real shift. So if the work that you needed to do didn't require a lot of thinking, didn't require a lot of cooperation, and is in a pretty steady state, then having somebody sort of barking orders at you, perfectly fine. If you need people to cooperate, to think, to collaborate, to problem solve, then it becomes a very different kind of set of skills and requirements. And I think in the past, the leader was the expert. So you would go and say to them, you know, we need to achieve X, or actually probably the leader it would be more like, Amanda, we need to do X. I want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, crack on, you know, do it by next week, or I'm going to need to have a word with you. Whereas now, most leaders have no expertise in what the people who they are leading are doing. They need to work in a different way, ask different questions, support them in a different way. And then we've had COVID hit. So you've got people with this constant drip, drip, drip of threat. And I just think really understanding the brain and what happens to people and how to get the most out of people is fundamental.
And, you know, you think about the evolution of work and, you know, yeah, there was expertise there, you know, if so you're an apprentice in a blacksmith shop. Well, you're working with someone who has done the work, is doing the work, has done it for decades, right? And you're learning side by side there, you're doing the things that they exactly tell you to do. In some ways, workers were merely appendages of, you know, a central boss, right, or leader. It was the way for them to get their work done by spreading that out. And now we're seeing this democratization, right, where there isn't a difference of expertise. And sometimes, to your point, yeah, the expertise of the people themselves is so much deeper. We are at a level now where expertise can be so incredibly narrow and deep, it's almost impossible for more than a handful of people to have that, or unnecessary for more than a handful of people to have that in an organization. And so you've got to have something else that happens over top, right? So it's not about expertise and telling people what to do. It is eliciting, right? Them doing something else. You know, Rebecca was talking about essential skills here of being able to listen without agenda or bias. Yeah. I think that goes hand in hand, right? That if you have that bias of, I know the result that I want to get to already, and what I'm going to ask you to do, well, there's not much reason for a relationship there, right? But to be open to what one of those experts might tell you on your team in terms of time frame or deliverables, it's a different set of skill. And we're still locked into that old, you know, as you were describing, right, that old model of what leader, you know, looks like. And it's, you know, sea captain, it's, you know, general, and it's just it's a model that probably didn't work then either, right? Totally doesn't work now. And so, yeah, where do we get to this new model, and how do we define that? I think gets to be an interesting question. What is the new mode, right? The new paradigm of leadership that we need to have. And, you know, I think at its central core, it's what we've been talking about. It's the ability to create for a group of people a safe place to work.
I mean, Holly's put empathy and being able to have honest conversations, and I think that's really important, because when you're in that space of empathy, you get to really understand, well, what does Ken need to have a great conversation? I mean, one of the things I learned early on as a coach, and I kind of studied NLP to help me, is generally me just completely in my full Amanda-ness is quite loud and is very high energy. And quite often when I'm working, you know, with clients who are not in that space, or who are having, you know, a bit of a dip in mood, I really need to dial up my empathy so I can kind of match my pace and my tone and everything to where people are. So there isn't that disconnect. And I think that in the past, there was this thing that, you know, you had your, right, I've sorted out how I am as a leader. I've sorted out, these are the things I stand for. These are my values. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to go out. So I might not be vanilla. I might be, I don't know, cookie chip or whatever, ice cream. But actually not everybody wants raw cookie dough ice cream. I think that's disgusting. I don't know why I chose it. Probably because I don't like it. Or whether you're chocolate.
It can be really awesome, I gotta say, but that's
or, you know, whatever flavor
right.
you are. But actually in front of you, for every member of your team, there is a different person that will need a different aspect of you. And without empathy, you can't match your style to bring out the best in you. You're not really listening to them in a whole body way to bring out that sense of what they need. So I think Holly's got that absolutely nailed in terms of that empathy.
Well, what, you know, one could define empathy as merely sensitivity, or you know, in the service of alignment, right? So as you're talking about energy, well, that's pacing. That there's an abstractness to that, versus empathy as human feeling, which, you know, there wasn't a place for that. In fact, the workplace was where you know, the office door was where your feelings stopped, right? And we weren't allowed to have human emotion. We weren't allowed to have human feelings. We needed to come in and, you know, be somewhat automatons, you know, but that's not who we are. And that's not what we're faced with. One of my clients actually said this the other day. He said, hey, I lead people, not robots. And it seems so obvious. And yet I think there's still this lingering mindset that people are robots, that you can program them to do certain things and they will go and do them. And there's a Newtonian cause and effect that isn't there, right? And we need to be aware of what's going on in that person's life, you know, from preference, right, of ice cream, of work style, but also, you know, where they are. And in today's COVID environment, understanding the stresses they're under, because we can't get the best out of them if we don't have that sensitivity to their human feelings, as opposed to just some of those more abstract work style pacing aspects.
I mean, I'm going to just pick up my phone and say, you know, when I was a teenager, the thought that you would have a phone that was mobile that you could carry around with you and stick in your pocket, unthinkable. The thought that that would also be a computer that you could have with you, unthinkable. I mean, this is just, you know, my 17-year-old self would look at this and think, you know, what the F is that? That's mad, absolute madness.
It's science fiction.
It is science fiction. So I think when it comes to the workplace, I think we're at the same point. So when I started work, you had a dress code. Yeah. So when I went out for the weekend, I would get changed in my cupboard and off I would go and be in a completely different outfit, because you couldn't possibly wear what you normally wore to work. That was unacceptable. You had codes for behavior. You had codes for how you followed things and processes. And that idea that you would bring your whole self, or you'd bring emotions, or that you might cry or have feelings or an opinion about things unless invited, just wasn't the way that work was organized. Because you had the people that did stuff, then you had the people that thought about the stuff, that told you how to do the stuff you were doing. And unless you were in that layer, there were certain tasks that you just didn't get to do and wasn't expected of you. And all of that is shifting and changing, not in all industries, but in the kind of most of the industries where I work in, people are hired for their brains. They are hired for their thinking. It doesn't matter what they wear, as long as they're comfortable. And getting the best out of that thinking is the most important thing. Now, when I first started working, you know, the line was, if I want your opinion, you can imagine for me that was quite difficult to deal with. So it was a bit of a nightmare to manage. So I automatically wanted to become a leader as soon as possible, give everyone my opinion, because I really like doing that. But I think work has changed. And if people come in and they are not sharing their thoughts, then that's a problem for an organization, because everybody, even if you are the kind of the newest person to an organization or the most junior, your perception, your experiences of work of that particular product or system has got so much value, and organizations that aren't gathering that are missing out.
And how to, engage people, right? So when we see the surveys that they do in the US, the Gallup organization does surveys, and over time, there are these gigantic shifts from 31 to 34% highly engaged. That's the range. It never goes much above that, never goes quite below it. So you have about a third of people who are really truly engaged, and 2/3 who are varying degrees of disengaged. And that's just stunning to think about. What is it that causes that? And I think it goes back to the thoughts around why people are hired in the first place. Many times, we're looking at resumes for particular skills. And it's a worse problem now, as you have algorithms looking for keywords and resumes, and you have oftentimes fantastic candidates who are completely passed by because only 11 of 12 boxes were checked. It's not even making it to a human, right? Because we're expecting this whole long series of skills, and we don't think about transferable skills. So it puts people in a place of not really being hired even for who they are fully. They're being hired for a skill set, but there's often so much more. And if that's all that's being asked from you, if that's all you have to contribute, yeah, then why should you be engaged? Why should you be fully all in? But there's this interesting contrast I see. Organizations, they want you to be compliant in one respect. We want you to follow all these policies, do all these things, do exactly as we say. And then when we need it, we need you to suddenly now be creative, open-minded, blue sky, think of, all these kind of innovative solutions that we can use, but it's been systematically beaten out of them through the command and control, the compliance of following rules. And then they wonder why they can't get creativity out of that same workforce. It's an interesting dilemma that these organizations have set for themselves.
And I think I'm listening and I'm nodding, and I'm kind of thinking, the research that I've done into human leadership, when I've asked people questions about their direct experience of what humanizes and what dehumanizes, the key thing in the camp for dehumanizing is your line manager. So I feel that the reason why we have low engagement and the reason why organizations seek compliance is to make up for a weak skill set at that line manager level. And I think that organizations often invest heavily in coaching and support and development for leaders, and they promote people up into managers, because obviously just managing people, that's easy, isn't it? You don't need any particular great skills for that. And yet the research shows that psychological safety is at that local level, clustered around that individual manager, that people are more likely to leave an organization because of a bad boss than they are because of the wider organizational views. And if I reflect back onto my experiences with my worst bosses, if I want to kind of call it that, I feel, looking at the symptoms of PTSD, that I have suffered lasting trauma from people who were incompetent and who behaved appallingly, not through malice, but through just a lack of understanding about how to deal with other human beings. And I know I'm not alone, because I've had groups and groups and groups of people share the same story. So I think the reason why engagement is so low is because organizations aren't investing in skills where it matters, where it impacts most on people.
And yet they'll invest further up the food chain, and they'll invest to fix problems, but they won't make the proactive choice of investing in those high potentials as much to develop their leadership skills, so that when they do move into that line manager, that first level supervisor role, they actually have a better sense of what they're doing. And it, it goes back to this misunderstanding that, managing isn't a different skill. And I see it in folks that I work with. There's this belief that, well, if you're good at something, if you're really, really good at something, then you can be a really, really good manager also. You see it in sales all the time, and you see that failure. What makes somebody a really great salesperson will not necessarily make them and oftentimes doesn't make them a great sales manager. They're completely different skill sets, and we're not training, we're not developing, or we're not bringing that along. And so organizations are failing their leaders, I think, in that, and failing themselves as organizations, because as you said, the ripple impact from this is enormous. You have one bad leader, how many people do they touch? Right? How many people can they disengage? And if we could make that one leader just a little bit better, right? And all their people below them just a little bit better, what a net plus that would be. But there's just not the foresight, the vision to invest the money there. It's, well, we'll fix the problems when they occur later. And oftentimes then it's too late. And you have people who have the trauma of putting up with that bad line manager, that first initial manager, and they're wrecked. They're wrecked maybe for their whole careers, right? So it's incredibly destructive, and it's an awful cycle, but organizations seem not to want to break it.
I think the interesting thing about some of the more radical thinking that's going on at the moment, so I don't know whether you've looked at the book Humanness, but what they're suggesting there is that you take out some of that layers of management, and you get teams or groups to then decide how they're going to lead and organize themselves. And so the key skills then that you need are around peer coaching and support, the ability to kind of coordinate, cooperate, that kind of empathetic understanding. I mean, Richard's kind of listed values like respect, integrity, accountability, humility. So you can imagine all of those things within a group that's kind of thinking about how they do the work. Quite often I see in organizations, technical specialists have to explain to the higher ups what they do, how it works, what's it involved. So they then at that high level can decide what the specialist down below should do. Now, I think that's inefficient. And I think that that's not giving the people who've got that expertise the empowerment to go and actually make a big difference. But what is scary for organizations is that if you devolve that power and that flexibility, you're losing a lot of control. So one of the other things that I thought was really interesting that came out from this research I've been doing was around culture. So, I've worked in organizations where, and I don't know whether it's the same in America, Ken, but, your culture is really important. So every 3 years, it would be, right, we're going to be a good to great organization, or we're going to be a, I don't know, exceeding further organization. And you'd bring in a band and we'll have to paint a picture together or something and get a sticker that we're all going to be, these new people with these new values and this new culture. And it never stuck and it never worked. Whereas in this kind of conversations I've been having, they've been saying, no, the best times I've ever worked in a place was when I was in a team that could work autonomously. We might have been in a lab, or we've been in this group where we're running a project, and we decided our culture, we decided our rules, we decided the way that we'd work, and we just were able to get on brilliantly and get loads of great stuff done. And again, I think that's really interesting about where control goes in an organization. And if you can empower people at a lower level, then you've got more efficiency, more engagement, more responsibility, more development, but people will need different skills. So the ability to listen, to be empathetic, to coach one another are really important.
And so, some might worry about then anarchy ruling, right? If you take out the controls, if you take out these layers of management, suddenly there's going to be anarchy, which gets to an issue that we haven't talked about yet, which I think underlies a lot of this as well. And we've maybe covered over it with psychological safety, but it's this issue of trust. right? And how vital trust is. And, the reason I think that we have, the butts in seats, mindset, if you're not there in your cubicle, if you're not, at your desk, you're not working, comes from a place very simply of distrust. And I've wondered myself, where did this start, right? Is it that, the workforce isn't trustworthy, and so management has had to, adopt this distrustful attitude towards them and instill control and insist on compliance? Or was it the insistence on control and compliance that disengaged and caused distrust of the workforce for, for management? In any event, it's now a vicious cycle. But what COVID is teaching us is that, well, you don't actually have to physically be there. There are some other ways to work, get things done. And then this may start to break, some of those structures as well. Like, what really is the better way to work if you are going to be working more virtually? And, with the vaccines that are coming, this is not going to last forever, but certainly it's going to be for the next 6 to 9 months before, that gets to a point where we can come back together again. But it begs the question, well, how do we come back together again? And how do the management structures that we had, do they still serve? Do we need to do it differently? Do we need to think about different team structures, right? Because there is some power in that smaller group, as you're describing, of people who can, self-regulate, be given an objective, here's the resources, go meet it, given some freedom there. And then again, that command and control, I guess, structure that we've had in the past that doesn't really allow for that, right? So I've got probably more questions than I do answers about it, but I'm seeing some interesting shifts, and I think it goes back to, what's the value of trust, or where is the role of trust in organizations and between leaders and their staff?
I mean, there was an interesting management theory. It's a little old now, but I think it's the XY theory. And so there's people who think, and I can't remember which one's X and which one's Y, but either you think that X is bad, right? So X is bad. So all humans are intrinsically bad. We're greedy, we're selfish. And if you don't give us lots of controls and rules, then we're going to take advantage, take the piss, we'll never get anything done, and we'll all be a nightmare. And then the other version is that we are all inspired to do the very best we can, that no one goes to work to do a bad job, and that actually, given the opportunity and the support, we are all going to want to rock at what we do, because that's what human nature is all about. And I'm definitely a Y girl more than an X. I think what I'm seeing in the clients that I've been working with is that this COVID period where people have had to work from home, there have been tranches of people whose role has traditionally always been, no, you can never work flexibly. And all they ever wanted was like a Wednesday afternoon at home. That's not possible. I'm sorry, you've always got to be in the office. And now those individuals and those roles have proven actually we can work really effectively from home. So all of that kind of, no, I'm sorry, you can only be at home if you're this type of job, that's disappeared for a lot of people. For some roles, this whole thing about working from home is just a nonsense, because they've had to work through in their workplace the whole entire time. So I'm thinking about the sort of more digitally driven workforces that I tend to work with and support. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that there have been individuals who've wanted flexibility. So they've wanted to spend more time with their kids, with their families, balance their caring responsibilities, or they've just wanted to work on their side projects or ride their bike in the light, anything like that. And the answer's always been, well, HR policy says, unless you are a parent or you have a sick relative, you can't have flexible working. And again, I think what this period has proven is that people have fitted homeschooling, of all things, around work. I mean, to be fair, when we were doing it, we did neither particularly well, but we kind of muddled through. But it kind of proves that ability to be flexible, that stuff doesn't have to be delivered 9 to 5. So one of the organizations I was working with, they have now changed their core hours from 8 to 6 to 7 to 7 for that greater flexibility. They are saying that every single role can work from home for a period of time if they want to. They can have that flexibility. And people can compress their hours and move them around as well, because they've realized that actually that's the one thing when they've asked people, okay, so it's been, nobody wants a pandemic and we've lost members of our family. Nobody wants this. That there's nothing great about that. But the ability to kind of rewrite some of the rules and work differently, people have loved some aspects of that, and that's what they want to take back into the workplace. So I think that's going to be incredibly interesting to see how that's managed, because some people, like we had Dan Kirby on, who was our first guest for this season, he decided quite early on, right, the tech department is going to be a virtual workforce, and he just got rid of his office. We don't need it. We can work well online. We don't need it. So I think some of those shifts are going to be permanent, and I feel kind of sorry for people who are going to be in organizations where they're just going to ignore all of this and just want to get back to exactly how it was before, because I don't think it's ever going to be exactly how it was before.
No, I agree with you. I don't think it will be. And, this is perhaps a really great point to, for all of us in the macro here, to reassess. Many of the structures that we have not changed for decades and decades, and perhaps even centuries. Schooling, for one, the idea, at least in the US, it is the older kids who go, and then the slightly younger, and then the youngest go into school last. And that's completely backwards in terms of just biology and where kids are going to do their best. Younger kids are actually sharper in the morning. Older kids, probably better if they start later. But it's so set, right? To change that is really hard. And so, a silver lining of this pandemic may be that it broke many of these things and gives us the opportunity to see how they ought to go back together again. I think in the workplace, like with Dan, there are companies who are reassessing their real estate. Do we need to have cubicle farms to house people for 8 hours to work, or could they work at home? Right. And then, well, if we don't need that, then what do we need? Right. So now there's a really great intentional question to ask, like, what do we want to come together for? Why do we come together? What do we need when we do come together? I think there's some great collaborative reasons to come together, some reasons to get together and have a face-to-face meeting. There's also a lot of things that we now know that we can do quite effectively virtually. The mastermind that you and I have been part of for 4 years, we are dispersed across the UK, North America, South America, and yet we are able to meet regularly, develop relationships. It is absolutely possible. And going back to the beginning here a bit, because I think we have those relationships, because we have been vulnerable with one another, because we have extended some trust, and that sharing and that humanness between all of us has enabled us to bridge the physical distance and have these amazing relationships. I really value everybody in the group, and have only met a couple of them face to face. I'm working on getting to the rest, but that different mindset, that different approach, may be where we end up here. But we have to, I think, reappraise how it is we approach leadership, how we approach work, in order to get there.
That goes, I guess, back to the first point, and why I thought having a conversation around understanding the brain being an essential leadership skill, because for me, it's about building trust. It's about understanding the importance of trust. It's about being trusted and all those kind of elements. I mean, I'm looking, I've got like, and kind of Richard has said, if we brought that kind of power down into the team, without an assigned leader, the loudest, rudest, least empathetic person would assume control. Well, if there's a lack of trust in the capability of everyone else in the group, yeah, absolutely. If there's a lack of trust in oneself and the value of your own views and opinions, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why there's a big shift in what skills we're looking for in people at work. And one of the things that really blew my mind, because it hadn't even occurred to me that it would be a thing, is this sense of self-awareness. And I don't know why, because as a coach, one of the things that I have learned and I know to be true is without self-awareness, nobody changes. And there's a lovely image that kind of sticks in my mind from when I was training as a coach. There's someone looking for their keys in the light, and someone goes past and they say, what are you doing? Looking for my keys. Did you drop them here? And the person says, no, but this is the only place where there's light. And I just think that's hilarious, because you can't find things, you can't change without that light and that illumination. And actually for our leaders, for our would-be leaders, for our managers, for everyone at work, they need more self-awareness, they need more light, they need to be able to see what's possible. And I think how safe they feel with others, how much they trust others in terms of their intent, their competency, how well they trust their own opinions, I think is really fundamental.
Well, and Elizabeth Shashir talked about fear and leadership, right? And again, the psychological safety. And if you have a leader who is feeling unsafe, feeling scared, that fear is going to transmit. They're not going to be willing to be self-aware, right? To be self-aware requires safety and vulnerability. And so they're going to close down the more fearful they are. And I think the systemic aspect of that was really interesting as well, that it does ripple outwards. It can ripple down, it can ripple up. And so, yeah, creating those safe spaces, those safe environments, so people can then have the self-awareness to grow and evolve. And it also requires us to not just take care of ourselves, but to take care of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in North America, there is a very individualistic mindset and approach. When you look at cultural variances around the world, right? You've got that continuum of individualistic towards collective. North America tends to be pretty far down the individualistic side, if not the extreme there. And it's not nature to think about supporting, that colleague, because how do you stop the crass, the rude, that lesser evolved person from taking over? Well, you got to stand up when someone is being put down. You got to stand up when someone's being, closed off, and support them in that. And I think that's maybe our next evolution too, is to get beyond just the self-care, but also the care of each other, right? And building that. And again, that's where you need trust. You need to have a relationship for that to occur.
But then I think you said get beyond self-care. And actually, I think particularly for the clients I work with, that self-care is the thing they struggle most with. And I'm not talking about, brushing your hair in the morning and, making sure you're clean and not whiffy. I mean more about that inner dialogue, that conversation with yourself, that voice that says, I'm not good enough. Yeah, this isn't good enough. I need to work harder. I need to do more. I can't say this. No one wants to hear what I'm going to say. And so I think alongside self-awareness is self-compassion. And I'm quite keen on self-compassion. One, because, I've worked for years with rather unhelpful I'm pointing at it because just there, very noisy, off you go. Self-dialogue. But the other thing is that there was some really interesting research that's done that's proven that having kind of self-compassion for yourself, so talking to yourself with a self-compassionate voice and giving yourself kind of a self-soothing, compassionate little rub, as it were, then gets rid of or eases imposter feelings and helps to kind of boost that confidence and that assertiveness, so that everybody feels like they're all welcome. We can all be a part of this conversation, and to bring all of that kind of thoughts and safety together. So I think that's really important. And my head is also thinking about, because I haven't mentioned it, and I thought it was really fascinating, Ken, and I wanted to just share that in this research that I was doing as well. So it was all about how do we bring our whole self to the table? And people were saying we need to be accepted, we need to be comfortable with who we are, we need to be able to work in smaller groups rather than in bigger groups. And what really struck me in those conversations was people were saying in that space of safety and of inclusion and of belonging, it's really hard for anyone to feel othered. And if you don't feel othered, then you start to get real inclusion, real diversity. And part of the reason why there isn't enough diversity in terms of views of what's great leadership, what we need in an organization, that flexibility, that adaptability, that real creative thinking of everybody, is because people aren't sharing their voice. And in these smaller, safer spaces where there's high trust, you get to hear everyone's views and you get real diversity and a real opportunity for everybody to feel embraced and included, which again, I think is really important.
You know, and as you're talking about the self-care, but then also what's on the outside, you know, it goes hand in hand, right? It one feeds the other. If you're not taking care of yourself, yes, it's impossible to then take care of someone else. And yet it's someone else helping to take care of you that helps you with that inner process that helps go out again, right? So, you know, where do we start? And I think, you know, for leaders, if we were going to give them some advice, my advice would be to start wherever you can, right? That may be taking care of yourself first and foremost, and getting yourself healthy and balanced, and taking an assessment of where your stress is, and how things are going. Might also be looking at your team and helping them. You know, myself, I tend to get to myself through helping others, right? It's by helping others that I end up helping myself. But whatever works, I think, you know, if you can take some step, whatever it is, right, and move in that direction, create momentum, you know, to tap into the Jim Collins good to great, you know, flywheel idea. You know, it's something that may not show amazing instantaneous results, but over time the effort does prove out, and we really are here for the long term. So, you know, start the effort, and start where you can, and whether that's creating some safety for yourself or safety for your team, or if you can do both at the same time, that would be awesome. I'm curious, if you were going to give some advice to folks, what might you offer as a bit of advice to a leader, given all of this?
Start with listening. So do less talking, do more listening, really hear people and make them feel heard. And I think the fundamental thing that shifts the dynamic for leaders and within teams is to start to use some of that CIQ stuff. So having these green conversations, talking to people in a way that boosts oxytocin, boosts trust, boosts sharing. I think that being able to coach, to listen, to ask questions, to help someone else do their best thinking, to be comfortable not being the best thinker in the room, but bringing out the best in others is fundamental. And if people haven't come across the drama triangle and the empowerment dynamic, I think that's really worthwhile looking at, because there, the rescuer, so in the drama triangle, you have a villain and you have the victim, and then you have the rescuer who comes and helps. And essentially the villain can get away with being villainous, because the rescuer is always going to pick up the pieces for the poor victim. So there's this kind of codependent stuff. And it's a model that's used a lot in relationships, but actually I see it play out in the workplace all the time. And the way that you shift it is that the rescuer stops rescuing. Yeah, the victim is not broken. You just need to coach. Ask them questions, help them. The victim, instead of seeing the problem, starts to think creatively about, what do I want? What can I do? You've got the coach helping you think about how you get there. And then the villain, because no one ever goes to work, I like that about villain. No one ever goes to work, I think, to be a monster. The intent is probably, let's raise quality, you know, let's lift this issue. Well, think about that in a way that's going to help raise the quality in a positive, productive way, instead of scapegoating and villainizing other people. So that would be the other thing I would look at, because it's a great model, and the ability to ask questions really lifts the way that people feel and think about themselves. And I think one of the biggest shifts I had in my early career was when somebody asked my opinion and they were actually interested. And that was a massive shift for me, because one, obviously I love to share my opinion, but I think at that point it was like, wow, gosh, I have got an opinion, and thank you for wanting to listen. And gosh, it's making a difference. And it really shifted how I felt about myself.
And tagging on that CIQ principle of asking questions for which you already don't know the answer. I think many times leaders say, well, I'm not going to ask a question that I don't know the answer to already. Right? Well, no, that's not the point. The point is to open things up, to be able to expand your thinking, expand your understanding. So ask questions that you don't know the answer to already, and that will enable you to get there. And I think that's some excellent advice for everybody, is to start with listening, to start wherever one can, and be able just to start moving forward to what will hopefully be a new and different workplace as we're at the start of the 21st century here. I heard somebody refer to it the other day as, I believe this was actually Eddie Izzard, that people will know, comedian. 21 is kind of the coming of age, right? And we call this 21st century. We've got reasons for that, but it might be, this is when we really come of age as human beings here, that we come into a different place. All of what has come before has been, our awkward teenage years, our formative years. And we're now maybe at a place of inflection, a place of change, where we're really going to be now quite a bit different than we have been. And I, for one, am really excited about it, and looking to be a vital part of helping to define that as it moves forward. I know you are too. And with that, any other closing thoughts before we say goodbye to our audience here today? Wrap up this conversation. The hour has flown by once again.
It has. It's gone by really quickly. I was worried that I would have nothing to say, but the time.
I was not worried about that at all. I knew that you would have a lot of brilliant things to say, and you did.
Thank you, Ken. It's been really fun. And thank you to everybody who's been here. I think everybody's been responding, and all panelists. So I've been enjoying lots of chat, but I think Richard said, am I the only person here? No. Everyone's just been chatting to us. But thank you everyone for coming. And Ken and I are hatching plans, aren't we, for Leaders in Conversation for 2021, and doing lots of new and exciting things. So thank you all for joining us. We'll let you know what we're up to in the new year.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being part of this journey for us this year. It's been really lovely. And we look forward to seeing you again in the new year, and continuing to explore what it means to be human at work.